welcome to the first in-season episode of Pit Lane Parlay. My name is host Mike Jokum, and with me I have two guests today. Returning to the show again is Matt Hickey, owner of the IndyCar Fantasy League, and joining us for the first time, writer and founder for open-wheels.com is Tanner Watkins. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
Doing great, man. Thanks for letting me have this little opportunity to speak tonight, and happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to be back. I appreciate you having me on, and we missed Jess already.
Yes, for those who haven't figured it out already, Jess unfortunately couldn't join us this week, but most likely will be back next week. So with that, we'll kind of just dive right into it. I don't know where to start, but I'll say a few things about practice and qualifying in St. Pete before we dive into the race for, I'm sure, a majority of the episode here. Practice I wasn't able to catch a ton of. I was mainly focused on the Mazda Road to Indy races. I don't know if anybody watches those online if they're not at the track, but I highly suggest that there's some fantastic talents coming through the ranks. All the way down in USF 2000 with, what's his name? Keith Donegan, the scholarship winner, up into Pro Mazda with Arenas VK winning both races, and his Junko's teammate Robert McGinnis having a strong first race, and Parker Thompson at Exclusive Motorsport. I could go on. But all of those races this weekend were fantastic. But the best part about Saturday to me was how wild IndyCar qualifying was, with a little bit of rain. I don't know if you guys noticed on TV. You'll have to fill me in here. But at the track in Turn 1, it was raining steady enough that you had to put your hood up. Could you guys tell on TV? Were they talking about it at all on the web stream?
We caught a couple replays of I think guys like Hunter Ray and a couple others that were sliding wide, and I saw also a couple fan videos that were posted on social media of them just like one after another, and the fans kind of going nuts. But they had a couple onboard shots too showing raindrops. So I think we got that perspective from our side on TV here.
Good. Yeah, it was, at one point Pagenaud spun out, stalled. Scott Dixon was about to, crash right into him, and everybody held their breath, and you managed to, kind of slide around it. So it was, all in all, to have three rookies qualify in the Fast Six, the first race of the season, maybe aided by the fact that it was a new car and they had no expectations going into qualifying. But I would imagine the rain didn't help much. What did you guys think of the fact that we had three rookies qualify, in the Fast Six, including, Wickens on the pole?
Hey, you can go ahead, Matt.
I thought I was really surprised, especially I think, I had hope for Matthias Laced, even though I think he needs to work on his racecraft. But the pace, I think nobody doubted wasn't there, especially after first practice when he led. So you kind of maybe thought he could sneak in there. But the one that surprised me the most was probably Jordan King, a guy who hadn't been giving him a whole lot of credit when he signed on with Carpenter. Wickens had a lot of praise. A lot of people were predicting that he would be Rookie of the Year this year. So surprising that he got pole, yes. Surprising that he did well, no, not really. So the one that surprised me the most was King, and then I'm pretty happy that they all got through the first turn okay. And then actually the first lap calamity was actually the veteran Will Power spinning. So that was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that and second those thoughts. Obviously, like you said, Wickens is going to receive a lot of praise this year, and I think, he'll get a bit more attention than any of the other guys for Rookie of the Year, and deservingly so. King, when that signing was first announced, the word was out there that he was somewhat of an established single-seat driver, but, you just hadn't heard a whole lot from him in any of the preseason testing, and I think they did one short little video on Racer.com with Marshall Pruitt, where you get to at least hear the guy talk. But I mean, good God, American fans just don't really know who he is. At least Lace has a little bit of a background of racing here in the States. And I think you put it well there, Matt, that he's got the pace. It's about putting that racecraft together when the results will finally start to show. I think, it's a good crop of rookies for sure. I wish each of the 7 that took the green flag on Saturday were full-time, because then we'd really have a hell of a race for Rookie of the Year. But I think it's interesting to note that rain, how it played into qualifying, and I'll touch on this later on a little bit of the Honda versus Chevrolet battle that went on this weekend. It kind of flipped the script a little bit, and I think while these guys are really good, 3 out of the top 4 being rookies starting the first race, that was incredible. But it's not something I think will be sustainable for sure throughout the season. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with it probably being unsustainable, especially at a track like Phoenix. 7 rookies is even more amazing when you consider we have Pietro Fittipaldi and Kyle Kaiser, joining the ranks, if not at Phoenix, the race after that. I can't remember when each of them start. I think Fittipaldi is Phoenix. I'm not positive on Kaiser. But moving on to, the race itself, like, one of you guys mentioned, the first unfortunate incident or mistake of the day was not a rookie, and it was Will Power. And, watching it, from eye level, it definitely looked like, Power just got outsmarted by a rookie who he thought he'd be able to sneak around a little bit easy. What did you guys see from a TV angle on that first incident? And, otherwise it was a clean start to the race.
Yeah, I mean, I think second and third turn complex was back to the way it was. I think last year, they added a curb just for construction around there. But not the previous years. Previous years, it was mostly flat out through there. So to see it back was good from my point of view. And then with Power, he just was trying to keep it as clean as possible with Wickens without hitting him. And in the process of not hitting him, he actually just hit the curb wrong and spun it himself. So I think the part of the race that I liked the most was we saw guys like Will Power, Graham Rahal, Scott Dixon, Spencer Pickett, Tony Kanaan, guys who ran into trouble. And in the previous years with the Aero kits, if you had one thing go wrong in the race, the odds of you getting back were pretty low because of the low passing and then the substantial decrease in cautions. So you couldn't just make a strategy work. So to see guys who got in trouble early not have their entire race ruined, it really brought me back to the DW12 first 3 years of the DW12 days when you just never knew what to expect, and if a guy got in trouble early, it wasn't completely the end of their race.
Yeah, it's crazy to think Graham Rahal really had just an absolute miserable weekend for the most part, and kind of has a quiet race. Gets involved in that incident early, spins, and then still finishes in second place. Now, granted, second place was a little bit of a gift because of the incident that we all will discuss, I'm sure, at some point here in the next couple minutes. But huge props to Graham Rahal for really delivering an outstanding finish after a pretty miserable weekend. They all got a little bit of false hope after the Sebring test, or Sebring is really a much grippier track and different track. But the one thing I saw all weekend, which I'm sure translated on TV, just like Rahal said, is Sebring, the track in general, has a lot of grip, and St. Pete does not. And there were guys sliding all over the place, pretty much from the start of the weekend on.
Yeah, and touching on Rahal, that's a team that's had a tremendous offseason. Just if you looked at sponsorship announcements, nonetheless, what they did on track during testing, and adding Sato and the way that they've talked this offseason, if they truly want to make a championship run this year and take that next step as an organization, you've got to turn these bad weekends into somewhat respectable results. For them to, like you said, have just a dreadful weekend from nearly start to finish, and it looked at the luck had carried over into the race. That was a hell of a sign of resiliency, I thought, from Rahal, and I think Sato picked up a top 10 as well, if I remember correctly. So, it takes making spots, any way that you can get them throughout a race, and minimizing damage. I think Newgarden's a good example of that. He had quite a silent race himself, and I think picked up a top 10, 7th or 8th. And so it's, those quiet results when, at least through practice and qualifying, things aren't going your way, and you just continue to make some cuts at it, to where at the end of the day on Sunday, you can at least pick up, a top 6, a top 5, and in his instance, podium finish. Those are the kind of rebounds that you have to have in order to stay afloat in these normally tight championship races.
Yeah, it's funny. People, said Penske and Ganassi had, not good weekends, which I think is kind of a bit of an exaggeration. Matt, I'll get your opinion after, but Newgarden 7th, Power finished 8th, Dixon was 6th, and I think Ed Jones was 9th, 8th or 9th, if I'm not wrong. Which to me is not a bad weekend. All in all, especially considering I believe Newgarden finished St. Pete in 8th last year, and we all know how that went the rest of the year. So if you finish in the top 10 or really the top 12 in the first race of the year, I don't think that puts you out of championship consideration or anything. And I think Newgarden, had a cut tire there and a little bit of a dust up with Jack Harvey, and then at the end of the yellow flag sequence decided to come back in for a little bit of a extra splash of fuel, which I don't really think ended up helping them all that much because of the way the race was a little bit choppy here and there. But Matt, what do you think about the fact that Ganassi or Penske did not lead a lap in a race for the first time since Houston nearly 4 years ago?
Thank heavens. It's good to see some competition back. Not only, I guess not competition, but just see some parity back. Back in what we were used to seeing 2012, 2013, 2014, even though Andretti, Penske, and Ganassi were the only teams to win a championship that year. But it was still, in the non-Aero Kit era, you'd still see some teams that weren't the big three doing well, winning a couple races here and there. But only because you got a couple on me. I'm going to put Mike on the spot here real quick because he always puts me on the spot.
Oh, all right.
And I guess
not
not always, but at least once an episode. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you a question. Who do you think, in your opinion, either taking in the whole weekend or just the race, which two drivers disappointed you the most this weekend?
Disappointed me the most.
And that could go for Tanner, too, if you want to think of your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going to put Tanner on the spot while I pull up the finish order. Go ahead, Tanner. I'll turn it over to you real quick.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the finishing order, if I remember correctly, most of the rookies, for one reason or another, kind of sifted to the bottom of the finishing order. Not entirely indicative of, the way that they ran. I think, Jordan King ran quite well until he ran into some issues mid-race, and obviously Wickens is down there after, leading over 60 laps. A guy that had a kind of a quiet weekend that, I really appreciate his technical driving style was Simon Pagenaud. You didn't hear a whole lot from him this weekend. Finished 13th, I believe it was. It was just kind of a mute weekend for him. And again, like we had said just a second ago, if you finish anything better than, 15th or whatever, that gets you off to a good enough start where it doesn't just completely put you in a hole to start the championship season. So, it's not a terrible finish by any means, but wasn't quite the flashy start to the year that I'm sure Simon Pagenaud wanted. And then, I'm not expecting a whole lot out of them right out of the gate, but my goodness, I was pretty disappointed in the absolute lack of pace from Carlin. They were just out of sorts, it seemed, the entire race. Kimball was in the way multiple times and then brought out on his own. And he's a nice, very nice guy, but just felt kind of bad for him because I think they expected a little bit more out of this start here. Chilton was happy to finish one spot better than his qualifying effort, and the same was the case for Kimball. But I think that's what they told the media, and internally they probably weren't very pleased to finish 19th and 20th in their first time out.
Yeah, great question, Matt. Well played by putting me on the spot there too.
yeah, I just owe you a couple.
Yeah, no.
I remember one episode he asked me who the Indy 500 winner was going to be right out of the blue, and I panicked and picked Elio.
So, Tanner stole my one in Carlin, although I still think Carlin, will show a little bit more pace. I was really, I think, I was disappointed in, Ed Carpenter team from a racing perspective. I know Piggott kind of got spun out there and really kind of wasn't able to recover, and Jordan King, despite qualifying sixth, I believe it was, or fourth, led a lap early, looked real competitive, and then had a few problems and kind of died out quick. So that was disappointing to see. And the one, rookie who, was not only quiet in the race, but was really just quiet all weekend, was Zach Veach. We didn't hear anything at all from him.
That's a fair point. I think not necessarily disappointing for me, but confirming where their team is at and then kind of where the driver is at as well is Juncos and Renee Binder. Renee Binder had some sort of Binder sponsorship on there. I don't know if it's his family's company or his dad's company. Yeah, it's pretty much in flashing lights that ride has been bought by Renee Binder. Not subtly, where it's just Juncos slapped on the side. It says his name on the car. But he was kind of just in the way, and I know that he may not have the best equipment right now, so they're probably just trying to get up to speed, but he was a moving chicane pretty much the whole entire weekend. And then, it's just, I think, if I remember correctly, between the new teams, which were Carlin, Juncos, and Harding and Shank, and then all of the rookies as well, I don't think any of them finished above 14th. I believe that was hard. I think Chavez with Harding Racing finished 14th or 15th. But everybody above them was either a veteran team or veteran driver of the series. So I think they didn't really have the best showing. I think they'll do better come Phoenix, given that there's going to be, if you spin in Phoenix, you're not going to be able to just recover your race. You're going to be in the wall totaled. Unlike Phoenix or unlike St. Pete, where if you get spun on the first lap, you still have the whole race to get back. So hopefully we'll see some more life out of the rookies and new teams. Obviously Wickens did have a great day, but maybe we'll see much more out of them in Phoenix.
I'm going to turn the question back on you, Matt, or Tanner, whoever wants to start. Your biggest surprise in a positive way this weekend?
Me. We're gonna have a fun couple of weeks here. We are gonna have a battle and just back and forth with each other. Yeah, most surprising. That's what you asked, right?
Yes.
Most surprising, just so I don't go off some tangent that doesn't answer your question. The most surprising driver for me, other than Robert Wickens, which is the obvious answer, would have to be, well, why not the winner Sebastian Bourdais? I mean, 2 years in a row at St. Petersburg. Not necessarily slow, because I think last year he had some sort of mishap in qualifying, because he started last, and I know that wasn't on pace because he wasn't slow. And so 2 years in a row, they just executed strategy to perfection. And I got burned on Twitter because I said that their strategy was toast and there's no way he's going to win with that. And in my defense, I think I was right. By the time the strategies had played out, Rossi and Wickens were well ahead of Bourdais, and I said the only way it's going to work is if they got a caution, and then he did, and then the leaders took themselves out, and he won. But fair play, they executed strategy really well to get him in that position, and then for him to execute his strategy with poor tires while saving fuel, while trying to keep fourth and fifth place behind him. I thought he did a great job. So to me, either Sebastian Bourdais or Robert Wickens, or even, a guy like Ed Jones, who didn't have a flashy day, but hey, he kept it in one piece and brought it home in the top 10.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm going to steal one here and go with my Pennsylvania native buddy, Mr. Marco. Not that he had the flashiest finish in ninth, but really had a pretty strong weekend overall. Just missed out on moving on to the Fast 12 portion of qualifying by, I think, 4/1000th of a second, or some sort of slim margin, but jumped up to third pretty early in the race, and then maintained competitiveness the entire weekend, which we haven't seen a ton from Marco on the street and road courses. So I think that's as good of a start for him as you can hope, considering the calamities that he dealt with the last number of years, whether it be an issue he caused or just an unfortunate electrical type issue. A good weekend, and I think a good confidence building type race for Marco going into a track in Phoenix, which he should be able to excel at. Tanner?
Yeah, I think the guy I would go with is actually Robert Wickens' teammate, James Hinchcliffe. I pick Hinch because there was a bit of chatter going around that maybe he would be one of these guys that could be exposed by a low downforce car, or at least a car where the downforce isn't as extreme as what we've raced in the past few years, where he's kind of had a bit of a step forward in his career. You got to also note he's breaking in a brand new race engineer in Lena Gade, and that team did quite well. The first practice, I think they struggled a little bit, at least what the timesheet said. Now everybody in practice goes off of different testing strategies and whatnot, but from that point on, they're quite consistent. You wouldn't have known it from watching the ABC broadcast, but Hinch was quite consistent in the race himself, and the dude was there all day. So you got to give him some props, and I'm happy for him and the whole SPM organization, because they were strong this weekend. They were quite loud all the way up to the final lap there, and Hinch ends up being the best finisher on the team with the fourth place finish just off the podium. So
quick follow-up. Tanner, what did you learn from the ABC broadcast?
Not a lot, man. Not a lot at all. No, I have mixed feelings because, first and foremost, I think they've got an excellent play-by-play guy in Alan Bestwick. He's very calculated with the energy that he brings to certain situations. And I read somebody mention on the boards this week that, I feel like he's a little bit better suited for oval commentary, possibly. And just, sometimes there's strategies that are tougher to unveil or grasp on road course or street course races. But for the most part, Alan's presentation is acceptable, and people rag on Goodyear and Cheever, and I think I would prefer the Tracy Bell pairing if we're picking between the two main broadcast teams here. But the biggest gripe I had was just the production of the event. I mean, it was ill-timed with the way that they returned from some caution periods. I think one time they said that they were going to caution, and they ended up going and put up the side-by-side graphic. and they actually didn't even play a commercial. The IndyCar logo just kind of sat there for maybe 30 seconds or so, and then they pulled it off, and then they came back, almost as if they weren't supposed to do that. And then, just minutes later, they then went to commercial and did the side-by-side. So, I don't know what it was, whether there's been a change of guard within the truck this year. I know, obviously, it's been well publicized that ESPN's, cut themselves from a lot of the motorsport talent that they had on staff. But it didn't look like an affiliate that really wanted to show their interest in moving forward with the 2019 television contract. And if that was their best effort, then that wasn't something I'd put on the highlight reel.
Yeah, and I will add, I have not seen the TV package myself since I was fortunate enough to cover the race, but Jan Beek is doing some videos before the season started on the new aero kit, and I think he did one on the windscreen that Dixon tested. Is a good addition and is the kind of behind the scenes sort of guy. But before we get too deep into the TV discussion, because we can certainly go there next, it's been a hot topic this week. Obviously, we have to, we'll keep it concise. Was it Wickens' fault, or was it Rossi's fault, or was it a racing incident? And I'll start with either of you guys. Just a quick opinion on it, and then we'll lay it to rest before we move on to the TV stuff.
Yeah, I still haven't been able to take still shots just on my phone of what a normal pass going into turn one looks like versus as far as like which line you take when you brake and whatnot versus what happened with Wickens and Rossi, because I think Rossi was going for it. He knew this was pretty much his last chance to get it. I have no fault for him for doing it. However, I do see his point in that I do believe Wickens did force him to the inside quicker than what most drivers would anticipate, as far as he didn't just force him to the apex, he forced him to the inside line before the apex. And so that put Rossi in the marbles, and they just touched. And I chalk it up to a racing incident. I have no ill feelings towards either of them. For Wickens, for maybe pushing him into the marbles, I have no ill feelings for Rossi for going for it. It's just one of those things that it just happens sometimes when you have tight, close racing. I think we can make more highlight about the start procedures and what may or may not have happened in race control. But ultimately, I think if there was fault for anybody, maybe Wickens for just not getting as good of a start as he did on the one before Chilton stalled. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement that you can't fault Rossi for making the move. There are a lot of fans that called out, this isn't NASCAR, this isn't the way we race. And, obviously you can't race these cars the same way that you would race a stock car as far as making contact and whatnot. But, you get an opportunity like that. And they were speaking to Rossi's pit strategist and lead engineer just before we had that final restart, and they had pretty much conceded the race. If you remember, Rossi was making quite a late charge, under 10 laps to go, and I think he came up on Kimball, and Kimball was trying to just get out of the way, but it ended up being a bad part of the track where he caught him, and Rossi overshot his turn-in and lost a bunch of time. And so they had relegated themselves to second place and were going to take the points and go home. And then the yellow comes out, and, that obviously changes your perspective. So, when the circumstances play out such as they did, and you go from not really having quite an opportunity to contest for the lead, to then, the guys right in front of you there, and that's a 10, 11-point swing there, you go for it. Very unfortunate that it ends up costing Wickens, 16, 17 spots in the finishing order, and Rossi still stays on the podium. I think that's what stung people the most in this whole ordeal. But you can't fault the guy. At the same time, I wouldn't have been too opposed to any post-race penalties, since there were some penalties given out to other drivers that, ran into the similar issues with running out of grip on that inside line throughout the race. But again, nothing needed to be too substantial. It's racing. It's going for the win. And that's, it's really actually good for the series as much as anything.
Yeah. All the extra chatter is definitely not a bad thing. I'll say this, and I'll try to keep it short. I have no problem with Rossi going for the win. I think Bourdais said it best in that he was surprised that Rossi gave it a shot in a part of the track that had zero grip and hadn't had any grip the entire race. I get Wickens' point in that there was a little confusion with the pace car lights still on, but the teams radioing that it was going to go green. So a little confusion, but props to IndyCar Race Control for making a quick decision like that. I don't think we would have seen that in years past. It sucks to see Wickens not get the win, or at least a pole in his first race, when he really raced a flawless race outside of maybe taking not a great line there into turn one. But nonetheless, we move on, and maybe because Rossi is not willing to back down at all, we have a new slight villain in IndyCar, it seems, at least based on the way he's kind of brushing it off and making fun of the social media world on his own social media posts. But anyway, we'll move on from that. Race 2 coming up Saturday night, April 7th in Phoenix. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more in the coming weeks here. Moving on to the aforementioned, everybody's favorite topic right now, the TV contract. Pretty much, it's no secret that it's NBC versus ABC at this point, with both saying, we'll get at least a majority of the races on, NBC and ABC versus, NBCSN, the cable part of the package there, and just having it on regular broadcast TV, which I think is great. And I think, both NBC and ABC have a streaming platform that they're developing. I know ABC's has the ESPN offering that's a little bit further developed than NBC Gold, I think it's called, which I admittedly don't know a ton about. And listen, the production, from everything I've heard, was not great last weekend, but I think it puts IndyCar in a position to go to ABC and say, listen, you guys have a couple races to figure this out, and if you don't figure it out, we are completely content going with NBC and their offering, because it's definitely the majority of the popular choice, and I guarantee when I run the poll of the week, if you want NBC or ABC, I bet you 75% of the votes go with with NBC. I'll turn it over to you guys for your thoughts in general on TV, not just the past race, and then we'll move on to a few other things.
Yeah, I mean, ABC, as far as their race broadcasting goes, is a pile of what. It's just, I, like Tanner said earlier, I have no problems with Bestwick. I think Cheever and Goodyear are, to their kind of detriment, are probably instructed to kind of dumb it down for some of the newer fans. But there's dumbing it down, and then there's saying completely obvious statements that really shouldn't have to be explained, like if you crash your car, you're out of the race. Versus when Townsend Bell and Paul Tracy do it, I feel like they do it a much better job, where they're saying what needs to be said without coming off as either pretentious, condescending, or just foolish sounding. But this comes back to kind of the old motto. I know we've been seeing a lot of Mark Miles talking about the TV deal, and I know that Maybe he's the one kind of pulling the strings there, but if this has anything to do with how things have been going, it's going to be in Jay Fry we trust. And if that's the motto, we're in good hands. So hopefully they've all been taking notice that as a whole, as long as NBC is not trying to pull the wool over the head of IndyCar, they've seen that fans pretty much majority want NBC. So hopefully they see that and can work out a deal that benefits IndyCar and then hopefully satisfies NBC in their needs.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there in the hashtag in Jay Fry we trust. I think we might have to make that another episode title or here in the near future, and definitely coming on a Pit Lane Parlay T-shirt. In the near future, there will be a new Pit Lane Parlay merchandise store, part of Wildfire Sports, our new radio network. I think that's going to be in the next couple of weeks. I'm still waiting to get word on that. But the one thing I did want to bring up, I know Jess and I talked about it recently. I can't remember what episode it was. It was in the last few episodes where, in Robin Miller's, famous mailbag, he didn't really care if 35 cars were allowed into the Indy 500 on race day this year. For whatever reason, we don't need to rehash that entire topic again. But Mark Miles came out today, thanks to David Malsher and Tom Arrington over at motorsport.com. Mark Miles said, yes, there will be bumping this year. I love, again, whether, maybe we need to add in Mark Miles we trust. It's a little weird saying that one, but whether it's Mark Miles or Jay Fry or a combination of, the two of them kind of just laying down now, put the chatter to rest, because again it came up in Robin Miller's mailbag that got released. What was that, yesterday, where he again said he would be okay with 35 cars. Now that we've gotten that whole issue out of the way with, and Mark Miles said yes, there will be bumping, we can put that debate to rest and get excited for a bump day and maybe some changes in qualifying format. I guess we'll see there. So again, another huge pat on the back to Jay Fry and Mark Miles for I think doing the right thing. And while some tradition may be okay to stray away from, I think bump day, especially this year with the new car and the immense momentum that IndyCar has, it's just the right thing to do. And I'll leave it at that. And one bit of news, I guess I don't think we got to last week. Oriol Serbia is indeed running the third car at Rahal Letterman, but is joining a joint effort with Scuderia Corsa, who will be entering the Indy 500 as a team for the first time. They've won all sorts of sports car races, Le Mans, you name it, they've probably won it. I'm not going to go down the list, but cool to see another team and enter the 500, especially for the first time in this year with the new car, and maybe another. Maybe they go the Shank route where they go part-time next year and full-time in 2 years, and who knows, I might be just rambling on, and this might be the only Indy 500 they ever take part in. But wanted to get your guys' thoughts on, one, if you like Miles coming out about, just saying, hey, there will be bumping this year, and two, your thoughts on yet another team joining for the 500 this year. We'll start with you, Tanner.
Yeah, as far as the bumping, been a little bit more of a hotly contested topic over the last few weeks than I expected, just for the plain fact that, over the last 4 or 5 years, when we've consistently seen either only 33 or 34 cars show up for Indianapolis, you saw everywhere the fans clamoring for the days where, we used to send 10, 15, 20 cars home on qualifications weekend. And then I couldn't have been more surprised to see these same fans, mainly on track form and forums similar to that, say, if 35 cars show up, 36 cars show up, let them all run. We've done it before. That caught me off guard a bit. And being quite the traditionalist, I know that we can't keep everything the same that it was in 1911 just due to modern times, but I'm completely in favor with the bumping, and that's an element of drama that made the 500 what it was back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the golden eras of the race, where you'd have hundreds of thousands of people show up for time trials. I think that's a big part of the month of May, and I think if we're able to bring that back in any capacity, even if it's only sending 3 cars home, that's a big gain for IndyCar, and I think that's a step forward. As far as the second topic was new teams, was it?
Yeah, how Serbia is entering with the Ferrari sports car team that will now be joining IndyCar for the 500.
Yeah, as far as the Serbia and Scuderia Corsa partnership, I think it's great. My gut feeling is it's not necessarily going to work out the same way as Shank. I think this is probably more so Serbia doing a great job of parlaying his testing duties and developing this car and doing a great job at making a sales pitch to a prospective client that would like to maybe dip their toe in the water at Indianapolis. I don't feel like Scuderia Corsa will be a team that moves to part-time and then moves to full-time in IndyCar. But it could be of interest to Wayne Taylor Racing, another sports car team that, Wayne Taylor himself has hinted at wanting to maybe be at Indianapolis at some point in his career as a car owner. He's now seen Michael Shank do it and kind of rope that into a part-time deal. And now a fellow sports car team, albeit I think in a different division, is making the move and making an appearance at Indianapolis. And so, we've heard multiple times fans would like to see one of the Taylor brothers or both of them try their hand at Indianapolis. And I think that would be an interesting segue to kind of get them excited about IndyCar racing if they can see another sports car team sort of pull off a joint partnership and show the way, kind of be the blueprint as far as introducing sports car teams to IndyCar. I think that would be the best gain out of this situation.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Can I just say real quick that Tanner's a natural. Did you hear how easily he fit the word parlay into his sentence without even missing a beat? That was perfect. Yeah, you're just natural. Scuderia Corsa, I think, is kind of, hopefully, fingers crossed, can be maybe a team that we see around the paddock every May. I kind of agree with Tanner. I don't think this is going to be one of those things where we end up being a full-time team. And the part about the whole no bumping if we had 35 entries at Indy that really got me was the fact that it was just some fans' question and Robin Miller's unsubstantiated, unbacked answer that started all the speculation, which to me was really annoying. But hey, Mike, if you had to pick 2 drivers that you should,
here we go.
That should be if you could pick 2 drivers going into the month of May, I know we might be a little early, that should be on notice to be worried about getting bumped, who would you pick?
Damn it. That's a very good question. Let me see here. I would have to say I think I would be worried about if Renee Binder. Do we know if Renee Binder or Kaiser is in the 500?
I believe it's Kaiser.
Okay, Kaiser I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with because I know he's been over here. My gut feeling right now, my far too early gut feeling without seeing any oval pace, I think you have to give the early concern to the Carlin guys for, pretty much not showing any pace and admitting they did not have a great first weekend. That would be my, early worry for, somebody who's full-time You could easily make the case that Buddy Lazier should be worried, but he's not confirmed yet. That would be, I think, the most obvious choice. But if we're going somebody who raced this weekend, I would go either of the Carlin guys.
Fair enough. Tanner, did you have any more to add on that one?
It is quite early to tell. I think if Jay Howard does indeed end up being that third Schmidt-Peterson car, he kind of had an up and down May. Everybody remembers his run-in with Dixon, and he seemed a little bit out of place just throughout that race. But Jay didn't have a terrible month as far as the qualifying was concerned. It's difficult to tell, but I think that he would be a candidate that you could be a bit worried about. I am excited to see what kind of goes on with Pippa Mann and Dale Coyne Racing. I think they've got an announcement coming up in the next week or so, but Pippa hasn't driven a car quite like this, and I think this car is going to expose some people. It's been talked about over the off season, and I absolutely love her to death, and she's the nicest person. But I am a little bit on edge about some one-off people that show up from year to year, and just somebody that hasn't gotten the seat time beforehand, like most of these drivers will. I don't believe Pippa's on the docket to take part in the March 27th test at Indianapolis that a lot of teams will be at. So I think more than anything, it's not her driving talent per se, but catching up will be even more difficult this year, not only with a new car at Indianapolis and the different downforce levels when you've become so accustomed to a certain way of driving these Indy cars over the last few years, but they've even shed one day of practice from the month of May schedule this year to accommodate for Mother's Day, I believe it is.
Yes.
So, not speaking on anyone's talent in making this observation, but just taking in those facts that it may be even tougher for a one-off entry this year than years past, just with the circumstances that surround it.
Matt, I'll turn it over to you for your answer to that, and then we will get to our pitfalls of the week.
Well, I'm not going to be afraid to say Buddy Lazier is going to be, well, I don't know. I guess maybe keep this age appropriate. So I guess I won't use the expression I was going to say. Maybe if you want to know what I was going to say, ask me on Twitter. But I think Buddy Lazier is in some hot water, especially if they do a Thursday, Friday only program. I mean, I just don't see how nowadays I don't see it as a viable option to have a realistic chance at doing anything in the race if you're just going to practice for 2 days, especially when you don't drive in a race car for 362 days out of the year. And then I'm not going to be afraid to say that I think Pippa Mann might be in some trouble. I think last year was the most, I don't know what word I'm trying to look for, skeptical or underwhelmed by Pippa, just because Sebastian Bourdais, let's be honest, was going to be the fastest car on that first day had he not crashed. And then when we saw his replacement, James Davison, come into the race, he was running third at one point, maybe even second. And then he was running top 5, top 10 before that crash in the restart. And then we saw Ed Jones finish third as a rookie, finishing up front, and Pippa was just nowhere to be found. And she said one year, and one year when she was struggling, I think may have been the year for the 100th Indianapolis 500, that, sometimes the fans don't know the whole story, because I think that week she crashed pretty lightly, albeit, but she crashed twice. And she said she was getting it pretty good from people on Twitter. And for all I know, maybe there is more behind the scenes that we're not seeing, but just from face value, what we've seen kind of in her career at the Indianapolis 500, but then especially last year when it seemed like Coyne actually had some really good cars. For her to kind of just be nowhere, I think, is something that she should be worried about, and that's something that we should keep an eye on, because I don't wish any ill upon her. I hope she makes the field. I think she's a great representative, not only for IndyCar, but an entire generation of girls that are looking up to her. But if she can't, keep it up front with the rest of her teammates, I don't know how many more years of Indy 500 she's going to have left.
Yeah. The good thing, speaking about women in racing, is there are some great, up and coming drivers, down all the way in USF 2000. The one is escaping my brain now that I'm trying to think of it, but her name is Sabre Cook. She raced in USF 2000 this weekend and had a respectable showing. And Bruna Tomaselli, was she in Pro Mazda? I think so, and she had a top 10 finish the first race. And then down in the US F4 series, which has a handful of road and street course races throughout the year, there's two women by the name of Angela Durazzo and Abby McLaughlin, which are names to look out for in the coming years here in the racing world. And I'm sure at some point we'll have them on the show, and I've already talked to all of them about joining at some point. But with that, it's everybody's favorite time to pitfall somebody for the week. I'll start, and we'll switch it up because I don't think I usually put somebody on the spot on this one. And since Matt has put me on the spot twice already, I'll go for it. I'm not going to do the obvious and go with the broadcast crew. I'm going to go with Tim Cindric warning against IndyCar becoming too spec.
Nicely done.
No, I got to think of a new one.
Matt, we can tag team this one. I know we didn't discuss it beforehand because of how quick this episode came together tonight, but I get what he's saying, but when you're a team like Penske and you can afford to spend all that money on different programs to make your car the best, but a team like Dale Coyne has to rely on strategy and maybe some luck here and there, but these newer teams might not be able to be newer teams if IndyCar is less spec. Not saying that I kind of like the balance between spec and having some parts up for development, and really I think the biggest thing this year is driver engineer relationship with the new car, and you really have to nail the setup. So my pitfall for this week is Mr. Cindric for that comment, and after that, Matt, I have to put you on the spot now.
Yeah, I commented immediately on Twitter because it's been a good couple of years since Tim Cindric has said something really dumb, and I told him that Tim Cindric can blank right off after I heard what he had to say. But it's just laughable that after nothing but Penske/Dixon domination for 3 years, one bad race into the 2018 season with great new cars, and he's already pissing and moaning, and it's really irritating to me. But yeah, that's a good pitfall. I do have the backup plan. I don't know if anybody out there used to read my website, but it's since been ceased, and so now I actually just do what I call a Twitter blog. Just do iPhone notes and post it straight to Twitter, and I have the section called the Cone of Shame, which is, to me, after every race I pick like the biggest loser, and so I'm just gonna be quote unquote lazy and kind of echo what I had to say on there as far as my Cone of Shame, which would be my pitfall of the week was race control. I thought they had a pretty inconsistent week, not only in the race but actually in qualifying as well. I believe Rossi got penalized for who knows what. Did Marco get penalized for who knows what?
Marco had a penalty, which with my own eyes, I just don't understand where that one came from.
I think it was Hinch that he was quote unquote holding up, and I didn't see it. They had an onboard of Hinch, and I personally didn't see it as far as a penalty goes. But then in the race, we had a couple incidents let's see. The one that got the penalty was Dixon hitting Sato pretty blatantly. Dixon just overcooked it into turn one and lost the rear and then skidded into Sato. Of course, in those situations, it's Dixon who kept going and Sato who had to be restarted and cause a caution. And Dixon got a penalty for it. But then when Rahal does somewhat similar incident, goes into turn one and overcooks it, and then nails Piggott, there's no penalty. With Rossi and Wickens, whatever your feelings may be on it, if you're looking back at it from a black and white perspective, you would say Rossi quote unquote caused it. I'm not injecting my opinion, and I already gave that, but
Sure.
You could say that Rossi caused it, quote unquote, and he didn't get a penalty. Veach hit Kanan in the first lap. There was no penalties. So I think for Dixon to get a penalty and nobody else, I thought that was pretty unfair. So hopefully we see more consistency coming out of the race control, because after the first race, I don't think we got off to the best of start with them.
Yeah, I think, Tanner, I'll let you chime in here in a second. Spot on. I'll give them props, for the way they went back to green with 2 to go and did not try to pull any sort of overtime or get any last minute gimmicks. So good on them for that. But I think inconsistent is the name of the game. Tanner, if you want to chime in on either of ours or add your own, feel free. If not, I'll have one more thing before we wrap it up here.
Yeah, just real quick, I want to touch on for the first race of this new era with the brand new Aero kit, not a very good showing by Chevrolet at all across the board. They had a decent representation in qualifying, but I think that, as we mentioned earlier, was certainly skewed by the weather conditions. And I had heard some conversation that, and I don't know the specifics of how this would work, but the notion that the Honda cars may be a bit easier to drive right now due to some of the torque settings that they've implemented in sort of the lower range parameters of their engine whenever you're accelerating in and out of corners. And so it almost serves as a way to inject a bit more grip, just at reducing tire spin. So that's, blatant speculation that I heard. But going back to the race, the first 6 finishers were all Honda. They filled 8 out of the top 10 spots by the end of the race. And what was most indicative to me was you had guys like Sebastian Bourdais, Graham Rahal, finished 1-2 in this race driving Hondas. They went straight up through the field, and from the back of the pack, commanded the top 2, the best 2 finishing positions in the race. You have Ryan Hunter-Reay. He finished 5th.
Yep.
He famously is making it a habit to pull in on the green flag, the opening lap of the Firestone Grand Prix of St. Petersburg each year now. And, a great drive from him. He drove up through the field after an early race incident. Whenever you saw the Chevrolet teams get cycled mid-pack or cycled to the back, they didn't sift to the top the same way that the Honda teams did. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I will concede that I think if you just look at the teams and the driver representation for each manufacturer, Chevrolet is breaking in a lot of new teams, new entries. If you consider Carlin and Juncos, that's important to note. You see those guys at the bottom of the results this past week at St. Pete. I guess you could throw a rookie like Matthias Leiss in there with Foyt. But I think it's going to be a Honda year, and that was confirmed this past weekend with the way things kind of just played out in the race.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, I know we're running out of time here. If you're listening on Wildfire Radio Sports, thank you for tuning in on your Friday afternoon. If you're listening on iTunes or one of the other places, WildfireRadioSports.com has the show live every Friday, 3:15 to 4:15 Eastern. I believe they also have an iPhone and Android app. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining. You can find Matt on.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you can find Matt on social media at IndyCarMN, and Tanner's blog and website on social media is at open_wheels. Both pretty simple. Both are outstanding IndyCar follows, and this episode, definitely goes to show that they are knowledgeable in the field. And with that, I am going to wrap it up. And remember, guys, keep your lug nuts tight.